Hello, audience. My name is Dalton Mortimer, and I am the Authenticator. And welcome to the year's very first A Mystics Vlogs, a show where we take a relatively serious look at media with explicit fantastical or supernatural elements through a magical, mystical, mythological, folkloric, paranormal, or occultic lens. And funnily enough, our Christmas episode was episode 12, which is funny because 12 days of Christmas, which means we're opening the year on lucky 13. Huzzah. To begin with, I'd like to apologize for how long this episode took to come out and how long of a hiatus I took in between the holiday season and now. Long story short, my year ended on kind of a bollocks note. It always is a little bit shitty because I no longer have the benefit of the Yuletide high, but also events conspired to just take a few digs at me, so I needed a break. And now that I've had one, and now that we're starting on Lucky 13, I have a story to tell. See, a couple days before Christmas, I started getting into the show American Gods. It's an adaptation of a Neil Gaiman book, and for those of you that know me, you know all too well that Neil Gaiman is my dude. I love his work. And while I would certainly not say that American Gods is his best work, it is still his work, and thus is fucking awesome. So, here we are, American Gods. But a little different than usual. Suffice it to say, I don't really feel I have enough material, comedic or otherwise, to do my usual episode-by-episode routine. So, in light of that, and in light of the fact that it managed to go from pissing me off in the first 3 or so episodes to not only not pissing me off, but actually kind of endearing me to it, I figured we'd try to start a new sort of routine for this one. Namely, an overview. An overview that doesn't really preclude me from revisiting specific episodes in the near future, and in fact I have 2 of them earmarked because they'll make excellent holiday-themed episodes, namely the Prayer for Mad Sweeney and Come to Jesus, both for St. Patrick's Day and Easter respectively. But, for now, general overview of my general thoughts of the series, and the sort of recurring motifs and magics that pop up. So, huzzah! New Year, Old Gods, and an American Magician. And that will certainly do for a title, come to think of it. Getting down to business, I figured we'd open with sort of my general thoughts and some, light opinion work before we get into the story proper. As to the mythos of American Gods, the show and the book, which, yes, I have started reading the audiobook, and I have already watched all 8 episodes of season 1 of American Gods several times. I'm still working my way through the book, though. I haven't gotten to the ending. I suspect that I'm not going to like the ending, but I very rarely do. Even The Sandman, which is by far and away Neil Gaiman's best work, and yes, it had to be said, this is not as good as Sandman, and no, I don't think that's me being partisan. I think it's a matter of the fact that Neil Gaiman was young and hungry, and he peaked early. He had to prove himself, he brought his proverbial A-game, and my thinking in regard to Neil Gaiman is much like an old-style artist or writer. He probably had friends in high places. In the ancient world, it was not considered uncommon for art or religion to be directly inspired by a god essentially doing PR. And if anyone ever produces a Neil Gaiman or a biography called The Unaware Prophet, it would probably be fitting. Yes, part of me thinks that Dream is probably a real entity. So, sue me. I'm a little mad, but in my line of work, madness is a little bit of a help more so than a hindrance. Madness is useful for the trade that I find myself in, so sue me. and as long as I remain objective and rational under most circumstances, I'm more than willing to give myself this little corner of madness. But as to this idea of Neil Gaiman being inspired by some friends in high places without knowing it, if that is the case, then I would definitely say that Dream treated Neil a little bit better than the gods that he references in here. And it's not only gods, for the record. Several beings that aren't technically of the class of being we refer to as gods, but are mythic and magical in nature, do make appearances. Um, in American Gods, God is kind of a catch-all term for thing of mythical or fantastical origin, more so than it is a technical class of being, which is how I generally prefer to look at it. Tonally speaking, this has a lot more in common with a folktale or something like The Devil and Daniel Webster and The Devil and Tom Walker than it does a grand myth that we are probably most familiar with in the Western world. It's a folktale. It's the kind of yarn you would hear your buddies talking about when they got drunk at the bar this one time when they met this guy in a suit who called himself Mr. Scratch and betted his dice against their immortal soul and so on and so forth. In fact, most of the gods in American Gods do go by some kind of euphemistic name that ties back to, in some way, their original name, but that you probably wouldn't bat an eye about. You would just probably think of them as an eccentric old gentleman who was just kind of creepy. In the same way, so you would have the gods here. And also, in the show at least, the gods kind of resemble independently wealthy eccentrics or mafia bosses. Many times when they're talking about clan warfare and pantheons fighting each other in American Gods, the show, you have this vibe of warring mafia families. So if that's your bag, then I might advise you to invest your time in American Gods, the show. The book is more blue collar, more strictly blue collar than that, in the sense that its language is very informal and almost working class in nature, which is unusual for Neil Gaiman because he's so prone to the likes of Shakespearean and very prim and proper and quintessentially English sounding prose. Here, though, it's very much like a Johnny Appleseed story, or a John Henry myth, or Paul Bunyan, or something like that. And a lot of the characters and locations and things are very much in that same vein, so it works as far as the storytelling goes, but it's unusual for Neil Gaiman, and it does sort of detract from the mythic weight of it all, at least in the spots where it might benefit from a little bit more grandeur. Well, it's grand, but it's not polished and prim and pretty. It's not even poetic in the same way a poetic edit is, so I'm sure it was intentional to sort of mirror American storytelling, but it is a point against it in my opinion, but for what little my opinion matters, I'm essentially trying to talk down to one of my heroes here, so bollocks to me, I guess. There comes a time when doing this where there are no sacred cows, so even Neil Gaiman is not free of my criticisms, I guess. Funny that, but it's the way it is. Anyway, so in addition to that, it could be said that there's a certain way in which this was never meant to be a show that I 100% liked, because one of its conceits does make it in such a way that I think it overemphasizes the importance of humanity in mythical and fantastical scenarios like this. I don't like that. I'm not a humanist. I've discussed this before in my postmodernism video, the various reasons why I'm not a humanist, and think that when humanity thinks it's overly important, it tends to overextend itself and annoy the shit out of me. But aside from that, it works for me. And it makes the gods more familiar, which I liked. It's something that happened in ancient pre-Christian, or rather pre-monotheism, stories that I think we've lost somewhat. The gods were not these unapproachable things. They were supposed to be beings that you could interact with on a fundamental and personal basis. So you could theoretically go down to the pub and have a drink with Odin, or you might find yourself in a situation where, the devil walks in the door and you just sit down and have a conversation with him, or so on and so forth. So I miss that, and it's nice to see it back, and it made me respect deities that I don't normally have a whole lot of respect for, so good on ya, American gods. And with that, let's grab a drink and get into American gods, without much further ado, shall we? Our story proper begins with a convict being released from prison on account of good behavior and a dead wife. More on that later. This is Shadow Moon, and yes, I agree, his name is probably the most improbable folk hero slash mythological hero name in the history of ever. And I don't know to what extent that is fated, and to what extent that is coincidence. But it is what it is. At any rate, after a released from prison scene that both puts me in the mind of Red's bits from Shawshank Redemption and also goes on for much too long for my liking, he finds himself in an airport trying to book a ticket home because he was scheduled to be released on a Monday, and it is now Wednesday. Once again, put a pen in that. It will become important later. Cue the weaponization of improbable, fortunate coincidences that denote, usually, friends in high places. And Shadow finds himself uncharacteristically whisked to first class to be wined and dined by the mysterious Mr. Wednesday, a grifter and con man who is a wanderer who tends to clothe himself in gray and white, who has one eye, and whose talents include sleeping and getting what he wants. And for anyone who the fact that he was called Mr. Wednesday and all of that shit correlates wasn't enough, yes, he's Odin. He's Odin, and I'm not even going to try and make it a big reveal like the show does. The very second he calls himself Mr. Wednesday and stares off into the distance with his one eye and says, "Today is my day," you should be slapping yourself on the forehead with the force of 1,000 suns. Why? Well, since it is my job to explain, I'll do that thing where I explain. Wednesday comes from the old High Germanic Woden's Day, Woden being the name given to Odin. It was Woden's Day, and then it was Wednesday, and then it was Wednesday, and then finally Wednesday. Fun fact, originally, in most European dialects, a W was originally pronounced with what we would currently pronounce a V with. Therefore, Wednesday is slightly more accurate in pronunciation. But yes, he's Odin. If any of the hints they drop immediately in his first scene weren't enough to tip you off, he has ravens that are revealed later on in the episodes, and yeah, it's not subtle. I don't know why it takes Shadow so goddamn long to figure it out, but then again, that might once again be me being mad that more people aren't glowing pilled. Hopefully, though, one of the outcomes of this little series will ultimately be a bunch of people at least being academically and theoretically more glowing-pilled. I don't expect this series will convince anyone to start practicing shit if they weren't already so inclined, but at the very least, if y'all get propositioned by a fucking deity in a bar, in a informal context, or in an airport, you'll at least look for the signs and not sign your soul away for the price of a coin flip going their way and 3 mystical folk magical shots of mead. Also, yeah, our boy Shadow kind of just rents his soul out like it's a position at a rental cop in a mall of some kind or other. This is probably why most of these stories happen to people who don't fucking know what they're doing. Because if I were propositioned by Odin, first of all, the minute he started calling himself Mr. Wednesday and it was revealed that he had one eye, I would go, okay, hello, All-Father, what can I do you for? As opposed to blankly staring into space like this isn't happening and then being confused later when it is in fact happening. I like Shadow, honestly. He's more intelligent than he gives himself credit for and all that jazz, so it's unsurprising that the Nordic god of wisdom does find a liking to him and so on and so forth. But he doesn't have very much common sense or very much uncommon sense, and in such a situation as this, you could do with a little bit of both in this case. So, yeah. In fairness, though, I do exaggerate slightly because I don't ever think that the concept of his soul really makes it into the mix. It's more like Odin requests to be his patron god by giving him a job when he needs a job. Never mind that, his job that he had with his cousin in his hometown was soundly squelched by unfortunate coincidences that are probably the result of divine intervention. But anyway, yes, so Odin chooses Shadow. Shadow unknowingly makes a bargain or compact with him. They do a little bit of folk magic by 3 shots of magical mead because Norse, and we're off to the races. Side note, I did enjoy the sort of folkish element of the magic in the show. There's no complex ritual, and even though it is probably implied that complex ritual would be more powerful than most of what we see, if a god already has interest in you and is sitting across the table from you, then yeah, it would take a small gesture to just kind of seal the deal, therefore, magical mead. Along for this particular ride, shortly after Shadow makes his bargain, is a leprechaun named Mad Sweeney. He is my favorite character in the show, and he's awesome. Although, given my particular biases in terms of what pantheons I do and don't prefer, and my bias in favor of Celtic mythology, I'm not surprised that a leprechaun would become my favorite character as long as said leprechaun was done correctly. And this one is. Case in point, immediately after the bargain with Wednesday has struck itself, they get into a bar fight on purpose because Odin asked Mad Sweeney to get into a bar fight with Shadow to prove the mettle of the man he has just gone through quite a lot of lengths to basically purchase. And in the process, Mad Sweeney offers up his coin, which is a magical coin that consolidates all of his luck, that is forged from a drop of sunlight. Or at least I'm speculating that it's forged from a drop of sunlight because later on in the show we see a coin that is silver forged from a drop of moonlight. So I'm assuming that Mad Sweeney's coin is the sun, or at least a drop of sunlight forged into a coin. And he loses it. So yeah, for most of the series so far, we've seen a leprechaun stripped of all his luck, and there's nothing more sad in any dimension. Seriously. It's kind of sad and pathetic. Especially when you consider what actually does happen to the fucking thing. Namely, Shadow finds out that his wife died cheating on him by basically choking on another guy's dick in a car accident. And as a final fuck you and also sign of respect, Shadow depressingly flips the coin onto her grave. The coin finds itself drawn inside her, and the force of the magic contained within the lock reanimates her. And given that the coin is a very heavy mythical object, from what Matt Sweeney tells us, he says it's meant for a grand hero or quote-unquote the King of America himself. So, yeah, it would probably have the power given its source and its sort of mystic pedigree. But yeah, it reanimates her. Mad Sweeney is rather nonplussed because he would really just like his coin back. And his luck now only works when he does things in favor of Laura. And Laura's kind of an asshole, so sucks to be. And by Laura's kind of an asshole, I mean, think in terms of Sam Winchester in Supernatural after he got his soul taken away for like a good season or so in season 6. That's the level of asshole we're dealing with here. Leading to a lot of funny Irish pronouncements by Mad Sweeney, including my favorite, which is, "You're a fucking asshole, dead wife." Because, yeah, he calls her dead wife, like, the entire show, and it's the most amazing thing ever. Anyway, that's the B story of the majority of the episodes. The A story, this is one of those areas where I'm like, I don't know if I'm supposed to like this. Because, see, in this continuity, or at least the story as we're presented it, apparently the universe operates by Mage the Ascension rules, by which I mean it's human consciousness or consciousness in general that dictates what reality is, and therefore you can alter the laws of physics by simply believing hard enough. Including if you believe in a deity. Said deity will become real and basically become a living thought form. And in that same vein, the main A-plot of the season is new gods are supplanting the old ones because people have obviously put the old gods off to the side if they still believe in them at all, and have begun to venerate things like media, in the form of the goddess Media, technology and electronics in the form of Technical Boy, and globalization and globalism in the form of the granddaddy of all of the new gods, Mr. World. Which, side note, getting slightly political here for a second, that made me laugh, because it basically means that Guy Verhofstadt, Angela Merkel, and George Soros are priests of Mr. World. And it also made me laugh to think of just how badly the new gods are losing in the context of the modern world. Because, of course, when the book was written, things were looking on the up and up for media technology and globalization/globalism. Now, though, how's that Brexit treating you, Mr. World? I would imagine it feels very good to an entity that thrives off of globalization and globalism to, not be able to do globalization and globalism because you went and put a bunch of people in charge that you shouldn't have, and they all fucked it up horribly, and now you're having a bunch of internationalists and nationalists come to call, and your post-national utopia is really getting fucked over. Also, media, while we're here. How's the old media doing in the modern day and age? I'm gonna venture to say not well, especially considering the unholy alliance between you and Mr. World, at least in a metaphorical context here. And yes, they have actually casted a actress to portray quote-unquote new media in the next season, so I'm basically just going with the fact that Neil Gaiman has realized how old media is dying and decided to troll the fuck out of everyone. And I'm good with this. And yes, I'm aware of the irony of me bagging on the new gods on the technical platform, so Technical Boy probably isn't going to be super pleased. But I've told several of the old gods to go fuck themselves. Why the fuck do you think I would ever be any more positive towards the new, you stupid fuck? I get the strangest feeling I'm about to lose my YouTube channel. Well, it was nice while it lasted. At least, hopefully everyone will see this. Lol. Dark humor. I stared too long into the abyss. Oh no. Fuck. Anywho, while I grapple with that bit of industrial, techno Lovecraftian occupational horror, I probably should just continue telling you about the rest of the new gods side of the equation, which is that they prefer not to destroy the old gods, but to co-opt and coerce them. Essentially, by giving them momentary power or a more stable platform for power, but robbing them a lot of their primal urgency. See also what we talked about in the Christmas special with, the Yule spirit getting bifurcated into Saint Nick or Santa Claus and Krampus. It's essentially that same thing. They want to smooth out the rough edges of the old gods and give them a marketable and appealing face, which will give them, like I said, momentary power in the short term, but also rob them of a lot of their primal urgency, which makes them more prone to, being able to actually subvert or oppose the new gods. For example, they give Vulcan a gun manufacturing, because he's the god of fire and forge, guns are forged, and as an added bonus, guns also have a small explosion that basically sends a projectile shooting out the top of them, kind of like a volcano. And, of course, guns are forged out of molten metal, which are heated up in large vats, and occasionally people will slip into said large vats because companies and factories aren't particularly safe, and boom, you have human sacrifice to a volcano god. All the more power to you, say the new gods. Same thing with Ostara, the ancient the ancient Germanic goddess of spring, whose name, funnily enough, got morphed into Easter anyway. So that was less of a case of selling Ostara the deal that they usually make, and more just this happened already while we were, in the process of being made. So let's just keep it going and hope that she doesn't remember that she's the goddess of spring at any time. Although more on that in the Easter special when we get around to that, and so on and so on and so on. And they try to actually do it with Wednesday come episode 5. Episode 5. Entitled Lemon Scented You, because media essentially tries to sell Odin on being new and freshly lemon scented like a new car by giving him over a guidance satellite, which does sound good in the immediate because it would give him the power over nukes. But given that he normally has power over A, nature, and B, wisdom, bollocks to you. Because that's the other thing I noticed. I don't know if it's just because the writers didn't know that Odin is primarily a god of wisdom and not a god of war, and is only secondarily a god of war, but in a lot of cases, Mr. World and the other new gods, they complement Wednesday on being a strategic god of war, but then they miss, and they even give lip service to liking that he has wisdom and knowledge. But in all honesty, looking at it from having watched it a couple times, it seems like the reason why Mr. World respects his knowledge and his wisdom is because he fears it, and that's why he keeps reinforcing the war element. You're a god of war, you're a god of war, you're a god of war. You only matter in matters of war is a literal line in the last episode. Because being a god of nature, of wisdom, and lightning, and war, and all these other things is a lot. Being a god of war is still a lot of things, but it takes away the wisdom, and without the wisdom, you can't be a proper strategist now, can you? So you can't actually fight a war against the new gods, in that case, can you? But yes, Odin, being Odin, is wise enough to see through their shit, and turns them down flat when they make this offer to him, and this does not go well. Vulcan does take it, though, and it ends up getting him shivved by a sword that he actually made for Odin, because you shouldn't betray the All-Father of the Norse gods, bitch. What do you want? And interestingly, Odin makes the point that if they were still, if the new gods were still giving him power, by him I mean Vulcan, if the new gods were still giving Vulcan power, he wouldn't have been able to kill Vulcan. But because he forged a sword for Odin, even though he was technically still in the new gods' employ, the new gods turned their back on him, and he was able to kill him. So it was, in an indirect way, them who killed him. Other gods that make a regular appearance are Chernebog, who is thriving mostly off of Fantasia, I would imagine. Although, interestingly, the brothers of Scandinavian mythology, Chernebog and Beelzebub, the light god and the dark god, are not, at least as far as we know, according to the original mythology, dualistic like a god and a devil. It's more along the lines of Baldur and his twin from Norse mythology, the light, ecstatically pleasing god of art and shit, and the darker god of, I can't even remember what Baldur's brother's name was, let alone what he was the god of, but it's more along the lines of that. The Norse, most of what we know from the Norse pantheon comes from the Poetic Eddas, so we do know the Norse pantheon a little bit better than the old Germanic or Scandinavian versions of it, but much in the same way as the Romans basically yanked everything out from the Greek pantheon, so too do many old Germanic tales and many Scandinavian tales and Slavic tales borrow from what we would modernly consider the Norse pantheon. So it is very possible that just like Wotan was the Slavic and Old Germanic name for Odin, so Chernebog and Beelzebub were the names given to Baldur and his brother, whose name I can't remember. The one that died from mistletoe. Someone in the comments fucking correct me. I'm not going to look it up and re-record this. I'm on a roll, and I feel like if I get off a roll, we'll be here in February, and I still won't have released this video. And I will not let that happen. So someone just look it up and correct it for me in the comments, or I'll look it up later. Anyway, so yeah, Chernebog makes an appearance and is thriving off of Fantasia, which just underscores my point of most pantheons should be doing well, whether media wants them to or not, because pop culture is a bitch, and nerd passion for the things they love is a bitch, and I can't imagine it would be any less good than prayers, so sucks to be you, media. But, yeah, so most of the season, the new gods being the gods of modernness and pop culture and shit don't want a war, but they get one because they don't call Odin God of War for nothing, so bollocks to you, I guess. And at this point I'm hoisted a little bit by my own petard because, I can't really talk about the last two episodes, considering I'm saving those for the St. Patrick's Day episode and the Easter episode, respectively. But we can at least round out our main cast in the form of a Nazi, the spider spirit of African mythology, and grand storyteller and god of wisdom, who in the show goes by Mr. Nancy, and basically is in a black, is in a stereotypically black getup, which includes a late 60s, early 70s zoot suit, which I enjoyed, although I would have preferred him being the spider spirit the whole time. I kind of wish he had just been like an anthropomorphic spider the whole time. I would have been amusing. Also would have preferred him being the wise old black man trope as opposed to the angry black man trope. But yeah, the people in charge of the show do the social justice thing. Like they try to make a lot of the God stories about coming to America, and in fact, there's an entire coming to America segment at the start of every episode that acts as kind of a cold open or coda or preamble, which, interestingly enough, is narrated by Thoth, the Egyptian god of knowledge, wisdom, writing, and the moon, and my personal favorite deity. Um, Although I gotta say, I miss the ibis head, but yeah, there are social justice elements here, but there are also anti-social justice elements, like when media is yelling at Easter and basically goes on a whole Patreon rant. It's extremely funny. And it's played as villainous too, so it's not a public condonement of Patreon's current behavior or anything. So we may have that mythical phenomenon known as the even keeled messaging, or the politically neutral messaging. Heaven and all other positive afterlives forfend. But we may. Or it may just be that Neil Gaiman was able to take his own personal biases out of it, or that his friends on the other side, as it were so, able to use him that they managed to sneak in positive things that even he wasn't aware that were in his material at the time. Who knows? But that's going to be a issue for another day because it's coming up on the 40-minute mark, and that is just too damn long for something like this. So, with that, I think I will bring things to a close here. Sorry if it's abrupt, and sorry if I rambled too much. We'll definitely be revisiting American Gods here shortly, but that'll be a task for another day. So with that, I wanted to thank you all for putting up with me in my sort of semi-longish hiatus, and I apologize because I'm well aware that this wasn't my best work. I've been out of practice, and I rambled far too much, and there wasn't as much substance in here as I like there to be, even when I'm informally rambling. But this is why I sort of chose to do this episode the way I did, because I knew I needed an opening act, as it were, and bearing in mind that this is the opening act of this year's A Mystic Vlogs, I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope you all will stick around for more content from me. Overall, like I say, I like the folkloric aspect of American Gods, and I'm certainly going to be keeping both of my eyes out for unusual strangers in public places from now on for at least the foreseeable future, because you never know. You might be sitting lonely drinking at a bar, and all of a sudden, Thoth might come in and decide to say hello. Although, unlike Shadow Moon, I doubt you'll be able to catch me off guard, guys, so have at you. But, like I said, this wasn't my best work, and I already started rambling again. So I think that's where we'll leave it for now. As usual, I'll say cheers, everyone, and I'll see you all next time. Knock a couple back for the old gods. Praise to the gods of old, shall we? Praise to the gods of old. Oh, for the love of Technical Boy! Fuck.